Good morning, everyone. Mr. Vice Chairman, you're free to start the meeting.
Alrighty, thank you, Zendaya. We'll call the meeting to order. It is exactly 9 o'clock on the dot, so that's awesome that we were able to go ahead and get started right away. Zendaya, have we complied with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Awesome. At this time, I'd like to introduce Josh Gruber, the Assistant Town Manager, and he has some awards for us. Josh?
Good morning. Thank you, Drew. Appreciate everybody being able to join us today. And certainly, I know this is not your first electronic meeting, but always want to caution everybody that you never know with these things. You can always kind of go left of center and have some technical difficulties. So we greatly appreciate everybody's patience in working through this, but so far we're doing just great. Want to take this opportunity to recognize a couple people that are going to be rolling off of the ATAX committee. The first person is the former outgoing chairman, Mr. Brad Mara. Brad, we want to say thank you so much for the service that you've provided the last 6 years that you've served on this committee. Obviously, for those people that have had an opportunity to serve in a position like this, you understand that you're not paid. It is truly a volunteer position, and the amount of time that you're asked to devote to doing this is far beyond small. So thank you so much for the efforts that you've provided and the service that you've given to the town and the community as a whole. We also want to take an opportunity to recognize Roger Friedman. Roger, thank you so much as well for your service to the town the last 3 years that you've been able to serve on this committee. I know I've had the pleasure of working with you for a lot longer than that, but we greatly appreciate the service that you've been able to provide to the town and to the community, and we wish you the best of luck in your endeavors as you head towards sunny Florida.
Thanks, Josh. I express my appreciation for having the privilege of serving on the community, working with such a fine group of people and doing it. We're not leaving Hilton Head. We're really reallocating our time. We spent 8 months there quarantined. Being at my age, I have to be very cautious, and we're going to do that. And then I have children and grandchildren up in Connecticut. So we're going to spend 2 or 3 months up there and then spend a couple months in Hilton Head. Our businesses and we will still be hopefully a part of the community. The go-kart operation is going to start in the spring, and we're just very pleased to be part of Hilton Head. So it's just more of a reallocation of time, but I wanted to be very technically correct because I know there have been issues of people with different addresses and things like that, or I would have loved to have been able to continue to serve. So thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll be working together in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Brad, any comments? And I would just like to say Brad's been a great mentor, and we really appreciate your service. But any comments before we move on?
No, I just appreciate my time there, and it was a great 6 years, and looking forward to what you guys have to do in the future. And Drew, you're going to be a great leader of the group, and just really excited to come see you guys in October. It's going to be a great one for you all.
Thanks, Brad. Really, really appreciate that. And the awards you have, I know they've been sent to you guys, so we're just really appreciative of your service. And again, thank you, everyone. Well, good. Well, with that, we'll move on to the swearing in of reappointed members. So, Josh, if you want to go ahead and roll on to that as well.
Yes, sir. All right. Richard and Julie, if you will do me the favor of raising your right hand and repeating after me. I do solemnly swear.
I do solemnly swear.
Solemnly swear.
That I am duly qualified.
That I am duly qualified.
According to the Constitution of this state.
According to the Constitution of this state.
To exercise the duties of the office.
To exercise the duties of
the office.
To which I have been appointed.
To which I have been appointed.
And that I will.
That I will.
That I will.
To the best of my ability.
To the best of my ability.
Discharge the duties thereof.
Discharge the duties thereof.
and preserve, protect, and defend
and preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of this state
the Constitution of this state
and of the United States.
and of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you both very, very much. We'll look forward to getting your signed statements in, and you will be rocking and rolling.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you
Jeff.
again, Josh, and welcome back, Rich, and welcome, Julie. We all appreciate your service. You know, it's an interesting time having to do all this virtually, so we appreciate you guys being committed to service, and we're really appreciative of the effort, and I know everyone at the town is excited to have you guys on as well. With that, we'll go ahead and do a roll call. So please unmute yourself to reply that you're present. Zendaya, would you please go ahead and do the roll?
Mr. Arnold,
Good morning. Present.
Andrew,
Present.
Mr. Fluker,
Present.
Miss Martin,
Present.
Mr. Thomas.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
All righty. So now we're going to move on to the approval of the agenda. Zendaya, does the staff have any additional changes to the agenda today?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, great. May I ask for a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Vice Chairman, I move to approve the agenda.
And I second the motion.
There we go. I was going to ask if there was a second. Thank you, Rich. Appreciate that. Committee members, if you had any changes, please let them know to Zendaya. But please, if you could unmute yourself and vote yes or no to approve the agenda. And Zendaya, would you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Fluker,
Yes.
Miss Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. That motion will carry unanimously.
It's early. You haven't had your coffee yet, Zendaya. I get it. So now we're going to move on to special orders. Zendaya, we need to elect a chairman and vice chairman. So committee members, by way of roll call, I'd like to open the floor for discussion. When called on, please unmute yourself, and when you're done, please mute yourself back. And we'll go ahead and start that in order of the committee. So, Mr. Arnold, any discussion or for chairman, vice chairman?
Let's start with, I want to say thank you to Mr. Mara and to Mr. Friedman for your service to the town. Thank you for that. I think they're gone by now, but wanted to make sure we tip our cap to them. And at this time, I'd like to make a nomination for Mr. Brown to serve as our next chairman for the ATAX committee moving forward.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have a recommendation for that. Jim Fluker, comments?
The only thing I would also agree with Mr. Arnold and move for the appointment of Mr. Brown as chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Martin?
I'm one of the newbies on the, I think you're doing a great job, so I would move forward with Mr. Brown as chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
And I concur with the foregoing statements. I would recommend Mr. Brown as chairman.
All right, so that leaves me last. I appreciate the recommendation. We'll put it to a motion here in a second. I think what we will need to do is then from that point is also decide on a vice chairman. So if there's any thoughts from anyone on a recommendation for a vice chairman, we would need to do that.
I would recommend Jim Fluker as vice chairman.
Okay. Is there any other discussion from the group on chairman, vice chairman? Okay, so hearing none, Can I please have, or I'd like to have a motion for the election of a chairman and vice chairman. So chairman would be Mr. Brown and Mr. Fluker would be vice chairman. Can I have a motion, please?
I'll move to elect a chairman and a vice chairman for the ATAX committee. Up to a vote, please.
Is there a second?
I would second the motion to
All right, to
elect.
be clear, the motion is to elect Mr. Brown as chairman and to elect Mr. Fluker as vice chairman. Cindy, can we please have a roll call vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Arnold,
Vote yes to both, please.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Fluker,
Yes.
Miss Martin,
Yes to both.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes to both.
All right, thank you. That motion will carry, Mr. Chairman, and new vice chairman for electing Andrew Brown as chairman and Mr. Fluker as vice chairman.
All righty, thank you everyone for that. And so now we'll move on to the approval of minutes. Is there any discussion or changes that need to be made to the meeting minutes as they were presented to us? Everyone's taking a look at that. Okay, hearing none, I'd ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, make the motion to approve the minutes for the May 28th ATAX meeting.
And I would second that motion.
All righty, thank you, Mr. Allen, Mr. Thomas. Zendaya, could you please call a roll call vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Fluker,
Yes.
Miss Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All righty, and that motion carried unanimously, so thank you again, everyone. So now we will be moving on to the citizens' comments. I know that the comments were open to the committee prior to this, and we were shared that, and we were all able to review those. But Zendaya, did you need to talk in and give that portion?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So public comments concerning today's agenda items were submitted electronically via the town's open hall portal. The public comment period closed yesterday at noon. All comments were provided to you for review and will be made a part of today's official record. There were 9 comments for a total of 27 minutes of public comment. Mr. Chairman, at this time, we do not have any callers signed up for public comment.
Great, so we're in compliance. And with that, we can move on. We'll move on to unfinished business. First item is consideration of a policy recommendations to the town council for the 2020 accommodation tax grant recipients affected by COVID-19 virus. At this point, I'd like to introduce John Troyer to come in and give us some background and additional information. John, you there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir, I am. And at the committee's request, we have contacted the grantees, and a number of grantees were very appreciative of the opportunity to move funds forward from 2020 to 2021 if circumstances change. And so they would certainly make that request of this committee. And I think that policy would be a good place to submit to town council for approval.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. I appreciate the additional information. And, with that, I'd like to open it up to the committee. I know we've had some brief conversations about this. But Zendaya, if you could, let's go ahead and have a roll call on discussion items for the committee.
Mr. Arnold,
I have no discussion at this time.
Mr. Brown,
So just to give a little additional information, obviously with COVID having impacted a lot of the events here on the island, and with um, kind of the unknown status for a lot of the events. I do think that it is prudent that we figure out some type of additional language and policy to give as a recommendation. There is some wording in there about spending being completed by the end of 2021. So in the application process. So in that sense, we should be covered, but we just want to keep an eye on those organizations on what they have spent or have not spent, so that we can consider it when we get the next round of applications. I would believe that though things have rebounded a little, we're going to see probably less accommodations tax funding coming from the state for this year. That concludes my comments.
Mr. Fluker?
I concur with Mr. Brown's discussion, but those groups that can use their money, that have ongoing operations, I think that, we should give them consideration for this year and to roll it into next year. And for those that had to cancel events or cannot reschedule them during 2020, we should give them the ability to roll that money into 21. So I think it's one of those situations where state law allows for a 2-year window and our local ordinance allows for one. I think we have to be somewhat flexible in allowing during this period of time to allow a loosening of our local rule in order to make sure that we get these groups funded. So that's my discussion.
Ms. Martin?
I tend to agree in that. Again, I'm new in this.
Ms. Martin, I believe we lost your audio. Are you able to?
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes, now we can. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I was just saying I concur with Mr. Fluker's comments in terms of being a little bit more lenient in situations, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Mr. Thomas?
I recall from some past discussion of this topic that we had talked about not only considering rolling the funds forward into the following year, but also a review on a case-by-case basis. It almost sounds as though the way the comments are going so far, that because of the situation and the continuing indefiniteness, that the blanket policy to roll those funds forward for both categories that Mr. Fluker mentioned would probably be the best course of action. And if that is the sentiment being expressed, I would concur with that. Those are my comments.
Mr.
Great.
Chair,
Yes, go ahead, John.
I just want to let you know that we do have comments and comments summarized, and we will provide that to the committee. But I would certainly concur with Mr. Thomas that I think it would probably be appropriate for a blanket policy, but we'll make sure that the committee has the details of what the grantees had provided us.
Great. That was pretty much the good recap that we needed, John. So I appreciate it. I think that we'll look to have a blanket policy in terms of rolling over for those funds into 2021, and then and make sure that like you said, there's a recap for that. So with that, I'd like to see if we maybe have a policy for that recommendation to be forwarded to Town Council for the 2020 ATAX committee or grantees for COVID-19 virus. So if there would be a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion for the policy recommendations to be forwarded to the Town Council for the 2020 ATAX grantees affected by the COVID-19.
Great. Is there a second?
I would second that motion.
Great.
Mr. Thomas.
All right, Zendaya, could you please call a roll call vote?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Fluker?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. With that, we'll move on to new business, and that's really the discussion regarding potential improvements to the application tax grant application for 2021. At this time, I'd like to open it up for discussion to the committee. I'll conduct this by a roll call. When called upon, please unmute yourself and speak when done. Please mute yourself back. So, Mr. Arnold first.
Thank you. This will be my second go around on the ATAX committee, and I appreciate everything that was handed to me last year as we started the process. It made it seamless and gave me all the homework I needed to get started. I see the only recommendations I have is that we go back case by case. We're going to have to dive in deeper again as well through this whole process, just a more thorough thumb through of each application, but I believe that the pieces are in place for us to do that.
Great. Thank you for your comments. My comments are in having gone through and looked, we were concerned we might need some type of additional information due to the COVID aspect that it's impacting these, but in looking at it and seeing that we have some flexibility, especially with the policy recommendations that we just made to the town in terms of extending the spend factor. I don't think at this time there's really any additional needs to change the application, since we already have it in the application that we can extend that funding like we were just discussing. So with that, I'll end my comments. Mr. Fluker?
No, I have no additional comments based on the policy that we've recommended and the information that we receive on the applications, which would include the financial statements of these organizations over a few years. I think that's enough information to be able to move forward on this. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Fluker. Ms. Martin?
Yeah, I tend to agree with all of what you all are saying, and being new to the application process, I mean, I'll follow your lead on this, but I don't think there's any additional comments that need to be added to that. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Mr. Thomas?
I concur with all the foregoing. I don't believe there is any additional information that's required to be added to the application.
Okay. Before we send it to a vote, I just want to check in with Zendaya. In Zendaya, in terms of the additional research that we discussed, there's no additional information that we would need to discuss at this time, correct?
That is correct. I will provide to the committee about October 1st, when we go into our first meeting for the ATAX season, the first official meeting for the review. I will provide a year-to-date budget report. That way, at that time, you can see where all of the applicants are, who has used some more of their funding, if so, and who has, basically they're at a standstill. So I will provide that October 1st, and all is good on our end.
Great, awesome. I appreciate that. Oh, sorry.
This is Jim Fluker. Will that report be because one of my questions to you previously was, we work on a calendar year and the city works on a budget year. Will we be doing that based on an apples to apples type of situation where we're talking about grant year spending?
So this will be for calendar year 2020. That will give you a year to date as far as from January 1st to, I'll throw out September 30th, as far as where everyone for the 2020 grantees, where their spending is at that particular point in time. And then throughout the hearing process, if there's additional information that you should need from the applicants, then that can be requested at that time. But that just gives you time to look and see where everyone is, and then formulate your questions and ask them should you need them.
All right, thank you.
Great, and thank you so much, Zendaya, for that clarity. Really appreciate that. With that, though, since there was no further discussion in terms of changes to the application process, I'd like to ask for a roll call vote to keep the application process as it has been, and that there are no changes to the 2021 accommodations tax grant application.
First, I'd like to make the motion, Mr. Chairman, to approve the 2021 application grant.
Thank you.
I will second that motion.
All righty. With that, Zendaya, would you please go ahead and have a roll call vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Fluker,
Yes.
Miss Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
All right, thank you all. That motion will carry unanimously and for the 2021 ATAX grant application with no changes.
Great. With that, I don't see any other items on the agenda. Does anyone on the committee or anyone from the town have any additional items before we adjourn? All righty, hearing none, we will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.